back in the box, so now listen. The way you pitching, you gon' need more than a mound visit. You sound timid and I don't kick it with round midgets that have.
Welcome to 3 Count Libraries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade, and today we're going to talk about Pain and Passion, a history of Stampede Wrestling by Heath McCoy, a really detailed, well-written book on the Hart family and Stampede Wrestling, a pull no punches type of work. To me, I believe, if I remember correctly from my readings, Heath McCoy is a Canadian journalist who is, also an interested wrestling fan. And this guy read everything on the Hearts. Okay. This guy read everything. I mean, I'm not going to go into this stuff, but he discusses it in here. He actually talks about the books that were written. When Diana Hart wrote her book, and even though it got snatched off the shelves because a certain sister-in-law sued her over, everyone knows it was Martha. Okay, Martha sued Diana over the book. Diana pulled the book off the shelves. But he had done exclusive interviews. He did interviews with the Hearts. He read things that they wrote. He read the Dynamite Kids book. I didn't even know that book existed until I read this book. He did almost everything possible to come up with this is basically a compendium of the Hart family and Stampede Wrestling. It is so well written. It is detailed. I don't know how many times I can say that it's detailed, but it's dense, but it's not boring. If you're interested in all of these people, you're interested in where Tommy Billington came from, what his background was like, what his family was like, what did people who worked with him and knew him, the controversy surrounding him. You also get to learn about all the guts of Stampede Wrestling, the Ed Whalens, the guys who weren't wrestlers but were integral in Stampede Wrestling. You get to learn about those guys. I feel like I learned a lot about Ed Whalen from this book, and what kind of moral authority he was within Stampede. But you also learn a tremendous amount about the Hearts, about their interactions with each other, about their family structure, about the ugliness within the family. Because of course the book talks about Owen and Owen's death and all the chaos that surrounded Owen dying and the fallout of Owen. It wasn't even the fact that Owen died that broke the family. It was all the lawsuits that came after the fact. Now, in this video, in order to not continuously beat down the Owen Hart drum, I'm not going to go into any real detail about the Owen Hart tragedy. We've talked about it to death. But I will go through Stu Hart, and I will go through Stampede. We're not going to talk about Brett either. For me, this book was all about Stampede, which was a territory I did not really get to watch. It's not on the network, to my knowledge, so there's nothing for me to watch. And I really don't feel like watching out of sync YouTube clips where I can't follow the damn show. So it's been mostly, I read the book, and if I can catch a stray match here and there, I'll watch that. I haven't been able to sit down and watch storylines develop and characters develop and stuff like that, which is, I think, adds to when you read a book, it adds to that environment that you've already watched it or that you plan to watch it, which I do. I do plan to watch it. So let's talk about Pain and Passion, the history of Stampede Wrestling. So a couple of interesting notes from Stu Hart. I'm not going to get into any real detail about his family life, but he grew up very, very poor. I love the title of the chapter. It's called Superman of the Prairies. Like that's so much fun. To think that this country boy, became, the Stu Hart, and all that entails. But the interesting thing I saw was that Stu Hart actually sold papers for the Ku Klux Klan. Not because he liked the Ku Klux Klan, but because he needed money. So that was That was an interesting thing to stumble across in a book. Hey, did you know Stu Hart used to sell newspaper for the Klan? He'd be like, what? But yeah, if you saw the Bret Hart biography, then you know also that Stu learned to wrestle in the YMCA, where he was actually bullied at first. He used to try to wrestle, and he would get stretched and bullied in the YMCA, and that actually pushed him into amateur wrestling. So that's really all I kind of want to get into. Of course, he ended up meeting Helen later, having all the kids and all that stuff. But he actually started his wrestling promotion. This is the fun thing. It was called Klondike Wrestling, and it began in 1948 in Edmonton, Ontario. Later, he ended up buying Calgary from Larry Tillman for $50,000. This was in 1951. It was called the Foothills Athletic Club / Big Time Wrestling. He started having some success in Calgary, then expanded to Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Montana, and Washington State. He joined the NWA in 1951. Got a TV show in 1956. It was an interesting thing that he used to do in the summer, where he would take 6 weeks off in order to let his talent go off and do other things. And then he would also try to bring in new guys, preferably local guys who worked in that area, worked in that territory. So he kept his roster fresh every year by bringing in new talent for 6 weeks. Then tragedy struck. Iron Mike DiBiase, yes, the stepfather of the very own Ted the $1 Million Man DiBiase. He took his last name when he was adopted. In any event, Iron Mike DiBiase goes on Canadian television and he says, if brains were dynamite, the people of Calgary wouldn't be able to blow their nose. This was in 1960. Big Time Wrestling show gets canceled. Gets outraged phone calls. They kicked him off TV because of Iron Mike DiBiase. That's great. Think about that at the time, though. That you could say something, a regular heel promo, not anything with a lot of cuss words, nothing that was expressly violent. No, I'm going to kill you. Nothing vulgar. Just that Calgary is so stupid, and all of a sudden they got so many complaints, they kicked them off TV. He got a new show the next year, though. He got a new show in 1961 on a new network, but business didn't recover. In 1964, Big Time Wrestling folds and the family goes broke. This is a very important time for the Hart family, as if you probably if you've seen biographies on Bret or biographies on the Hart family, they always talked about growing up poor. And people would be like, what are you guys talking about? You lived in a mansion. The Hart house was a gigantic mansion that was on a plantation. How is it that the Harts grew up poor? Well, this is why. Goddamn Stampede kept going out of business. It wasn't a smooth ride, man. This was the first time Stampede went out of business. So, in 1965, Stu borrows some money to start another promotion. It's called Wildcat Wrestling in 1965. 1967, Wildcat changes its name to Stampede. Now the money is rolling in again. The family's doing okay. In 1972, Stu Hart decides to wrestle a tiger, and that's awesome. It's an awesome sight, putting the visuals on the screen. It's such an awesome thing. I hope I can find video. The very first ladder match also took place in 1972. Dan Crawford versus Tor Kamada for $1,000. Dan Crawford invented the match, and he was the booker of Stampede at the time, and is the one who came up with the $1,000 prize and all of this. So in 1977, the real estate market crashed, and Stu Hart considers ending Stampede again. Business got really, really bad. 1977, things looks like it's not going to work out. Thankfully, Bruce does something useful. He goes over on an English tour. He finds this kid named Tommy Billington. Tommy Billington is the Dynamite Kid. So Bruce, there's two sides to Bruce Hart in this story. One, that he was a visionary. That by finding the Dynamite Kid, watching him and saying to himself, oh my God, this kid is awesome. He, of course, this also benefited him too. He focused on the lighter weight classes. He brought Dynamite Kid back to Canada and restarted Stampede with the Dynamite Kid as being the focal point. He's the top star of the promotion. But there's also this belief that Bruce only had the job of being booker of Stampede because of his mom. Not because of his parents, but because of his mom. There's a running theme through the book that Bruce is kind of mommy's favorite. And that without Stampede, what is Bruce going to do? Stampede, despite the fact that it was owned by his dad, it was really Bruce's baby. And you kind of get that idea through the book. And the way that the book is written, a lot of it leans on Bruce. The first story in the book is about the boys beating the shit out of Bruce and trying to kill him. Well, specifically, it was a Dynamite Kid that was trying to kill him. So Bruce had booked the territory to go way out into the sticks. The territory sucked. This was 1989. The company had folded twice by this point. Everybody was tired of Bruce and his bullshit. The Dynamite Kid had been the booker at one point after he quit the WWF and came back to Stampede. But somehow, some way, Mama's baby ended up with the book again. And everybody was tired of Bruce. So they decided to pull over on the side of the road in Hay River and beat up Bruce. And they was going to kill him. Everybody was hopped up on coke and steroids. And if it wasn't for the police showing up, Bruce Hart probably would have got beat to death in 1989 in the cold in the middle of... Well, I think it might have been in summer. But it's probably cold in Canada in the summer. But that's an excellent thing. Like if you read the book and you see that Bruce just was the linchpin for so much stuff. And he's probably, outside of Stu, the most integral person in this entire story, but there is no Bruce Hart biography. There is just a lot of Bruce did this, and then Bruce was integral in doing that. And of course, Bruce defended himself because the guy did interviews. So Bruce would talk about, what he did and how, people hated him and how people thought he had a big ego. Then he said the same thing about Brett. So it was a lot of that mudslinging. That's the kind of stuff that, near the middle to the end of the book, it becomes a lot of mudslinging with the family not really liking each other. But 1984, Stu Hart is 69 years old. He wants out of the wrestling business, and then here comes his pal from Stanford, who says, "Pal, $100,000 for 10 years. That's $1 million. Let me buy your promotion." Stu was like, "Sure, but here's what I want. I want jobs for Bret Hart, Davey, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, who was his son-in-law by this point in time, Tommy Billington, and Bruce. And I want a percentage of the gate in Calgary and Edmonton." And Vince was like, "Sure, pal. Whatever you say. Whatever you say, pal." Bruce is made the booking agent in Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Seattle. But he's pissed off at the sale. Because, again, it might be owned by Stu. But Bruce, Stampede is his baby. He didn't want to let it go. Some crazy fan, some super fan, decides he wants to open up his own Stampede Wrestling. Everybody knew it was phony, but he did it anyway. Bruce, working for the WWF at the time, they had this verbal contract. It was nothing written. But there was a verbal contract, and the only thing Vince wanted, other than the no-compete, was a no-compete. Outside of the territory, so he can run Calgary without, Stu Hart or anybody in the family messing with him. Instead, Bruce decides to try to lead a mutiny of guys against Vince to join this new Stampede, even though he didn't really have anything to do with it at the time. But he was also in talks with other people to do other things in Canada. And he went and got a promoter's license in Canada. He was trying to run his own shows in Canada. He wasn't doing a good job for Vince. He was kind of like, you're even though you're tearing it up in Toronto, you suck in Calgary, Vince. I mean, what can I tell you? It's just not reaching the people, you know? And this, of course, creates that schism. Is it that Vince's stars like Hulk Hogan and these guys just were not fit for that territory? That was used to Dynamite Kid, that was, you know, who was physical, smaller, ferocious, high flying, and then here comes Hogan with his routine? Is it the fact that didn't work? Or is it the fact that Bruce Hart didn't like it anyway and was sabotaging the whole thing? We don't know. But our pal from Stanford decides, you know what? Fuck Bruce. You know, here's what I'm going to do. I ain't giving Stu shit. He ain't pay Stu at all. Said the deal was off. He goes to Stu. Your son running opposition. Broke our verbal contract. You get nothing. Stu got nothing. So, but what is Bruce going to do if there's no Stampede? Well, he goes to Stu. Guess what happens? They start up Stampede again. 1985. Stampede is resurrected. This is the version of Stampede that featured Owen Hart, that featured Brian Pillman, that featured some of the other younger guys. I think Benoit maybe wrestled in this version of Stampede. I'm not sure. But this is around the time where the Harts did their Hart School, the School of Hard Knocks. And that's where they trained Pillman and Owen and Benoit and some other guys. And this was another chance of giving Bruce another chance. This, of course, leads to the big fight in 1989 where Billington had enough of Bruce and his bullshit and it was going to do him dirty out in the middle of nowhere. Vince was kind enough to let the Harts, you know, British Bulldog and Brett and all those guys, Brett, because I think him and Jim were the only two that were still under contract at this point. He let them work in this Bruce's Stampede Wrestling at this during their downtime. So, and they were really the only draws. You know, when Brett and Neidhart showed up, business boomed. But when they weren't there, which was most of the time because Vince was using them on TV and everything, the territory was losing money. Stu ended up losing $1 million. He closed Stampede again in 1990. And that was the end. This time, there was nothing Bruce could do. Of course, Bruce wouldn't go away, though, because it was Bruce's idea to have SummerSlam 1992? Or was it 93? It was 93. When they did the Harts versus the Shawn Michaels and his Knights. It was supposed to be Jerry Lawler. That was Bruce's idea. But this is an excellent book. As you can see how, the rise and fall of Stampede. A lot of people criticizing Bruce for his booking style. That at first it was visionary and it was ahead of its time. And then out of nowhere, it just got stale really quickly. Tommy Billington being a brute, being a bully, beating up people, ex-laxing guys. There's a story about him introducing steroids to British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, and actually shooting him up with milk. It is some crazy stories of the Dynamite Kid being an absolutely evil gremlin in this book. But they're not presented as Tommy Billington is an evil gremlin. It just says that he was a loving guy with a mean streak or something like that. He showed McCoy. He showed respect to everybody, no matter what crackpot thing they said. And the Hart said a lot of crackpot stuff. He played each one of them with respect. Martha wouldn't talk to him, of course, so I don't think there's anything from Martha in the book, outside of maybe quotes from Martha's book. But he talked to pretty much everybody in the family. And it makes for a great read. Because when you have something that happens like when Stu is discussed about whether Stu was a bully or not, it's proposed as something that Luthez believes. Luthez believes that Stu Hart is a bully. And it's then posed as questions to everyone around. And, of course, Brett and Bruce are going to be like, no, Dad wasn't a bully. He would always tell these guys, this is what we're going to do. And then you would ask one of the son-in-laws, like Ben Bassarab or something like that. And he'd be like, oh, yeah, that Stu was a bully. And that brings the counterweight to the book. That's what makes it so good to read. It's not just, here's what it is. Here's this idea that was proposed. Bloop. Now let's watch the sharks go around and have their own opinion on it. And that's how the Owen Hart thing is. And it gets ugly. It gets ugly. Because it's not just Owen's death, which, universally, everybody's sad. But then it's the lawsuits. Then it's still about the lawyers. The lawyers are put out there. And then you find out there's Martha's lawyers. And Stu and Helen ain't got no, they don't got no power in this situation. Martha got all the power. Martha's calling all the shots. Martha got all the goddamn money, Well, she didn't get it all, but she got most of it. And, then she turned heel on the rest of the family. They ate Martha alive in the book, of course. Martha hates them. It becomes this whole ordeal that is rather intriguing to read, especially if you are, interested in the Hart family dynamics, because it's not just everybody hates Martha. It's at some point the Harts against each other, because Martha's kind of on the outside. But it's brothers and sisters arguing over whether this was the right thing to do. Whether, and they said, explicitly in the book, the Stu and Helen was stuck in the middle of, the sue the pants off Vince McMahon for $100 million or whatever side of the family, which included Brett and Bruce. And then there was the, hey, my husband need a goddamn job. You can't sue him for too much. Sue him, sure. But you also can't sue him for too much, because if you put him out of business, where the hell my husband going to work? That's the Diana and the Allison side of the family. Because I think it's Allison that is Natalia's mom. Also, there is that fact of the stress of the lawsuits, the stress of the trial, and how it was weighing on Stu and Helen, and how they were essentially cut out of the situation by Martha. And it got real ugly. But that's the way that the book is written, where it proposes a controversial idea. It's just kind of dropped there like a needle. Boop. And then you just watch everybody, the interviews rather, swirl around this topic. It is very intriguing to read. It makes it an awesome read, even if you don't agree with everything. But McCoy is fair to everybody. He is detailed. I don't know how many times I've said detailed so far. And, meticulous with his notes and things that he's put together. I did not feel like I was reading a bullshit book or a propaganda piece or anything like that. I felt like I was reading a history book by somebody who was genuinely interested in the Hart family and in the history of Stampede Wrestling, and looking at this chaotic family and saying to themselves, they love each other, but man, are they nuts. All of them are crazy, and, it's natural. You see the Harts as human beings at that point. They all have they have their own agendas. And by the time you get through the whole thing about Owens dying, you do see that they have their own agendas, because part of the reason Brett wanted to sue Vince's pants off is obviously because of Montreal, and Bruce because, Vince put him out of business. So that's part of the dynamic that you have to realize as you read the book. Everybody's got their own reasons why they want to either take Vince down or protect them. And it's not just because of Owen. Owen is just maybe their reason for wanting to say, oh, he killed my brother, let's take him down. But really, he's pissed about Stampede. Or he's pissed about Montreal. Or that's just, more logs on the fire. And this kind of thing makes the book very interesting to read. And you should definitely go read it.
Yeah. We're just gonna